Have you ever sat down somewhere, only to realize someone wished you weren't there? Not because of what you did, but because of who you are. Imagine that moment. Not anger, not noise, just the heavy silence of being unseen. Now picture this: a calm, poised black CEO boards a flight after a long day. She takes her seat, smiles politely, and the woman beside her recoils, refusing to sit next to her. The crew hesitates, the cabin watches, and in that instant, she faces a choice we all might one day face: stay silent to keep the peace, or speak up to protect her dignity. What would you do if the world tried to shrink your worth to the color of your skin? With one quiet phone call, she doesn't just defend herself, she grounds an entire system built on arrogance and fear. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about justice at 30,000 feet, and the power of grace when the world expects you to break. Because sometimes, the most powerful voice is the one that refuses to stay silent. Stay with us, share, and subscribe, because this is a story you'll feel long after it ends. The boarding line moved slowly that morning at JFK Terminal 5. Outside, the February air was cold enough to mist the glass panels with every breath. Inside the cabin of Helios Air Flight 204, the light was soft and gray, filtering through the oval windows. Flight attendants moved like practiced dancers checking belts, smiling politely, keeping their voices low. In the first-class cabin, Seat 2A already had a quiet passenger. She was a woman in her early 40s, dressed in a navy wool suit, laptop closed, a paper notebook on her lap. Her name was Dr. Naomi Sinclair, founder and chief executive of Viridian Systems, a company that built ethical AI infrastructure for major airlines. To most travelers, she looked like any other businesswoman: tired, composed, detached. Only the faint silver pin on her jacket, shaped like an infinity symbol, hinted at status few could imagine. Naomi had flown this route countless times from New York to San Francisco. 6 hours of sky she used to think of as her moving office. She liked the quiet before takeoff, the sound of zippers, coffee being poured, the hum of an engine waking up beneath her feet. It gave her time to think, to breathe between meetings and speeches and contracts that never seemed to end. Her phone buzzed once. A reminder flashed: Conference on Corporate Ethics, 3 p.m. Pacific. She smiled faintly and silenced it. For a moment, she let herself drift. She remembered her mother's words when she first became CEO. You'll sit in rooms where your presence will confuse people. Let them stay confused. Just keep your seat. That sentence had followed her through boardrooms, airports, and the unspoken tests of every space she entered. The boarding doors closed halfway when a new passenger appeared. A woman in her late 50s, tall, elegant, diamond earrings catching the light. Margaret Holt, according to the tag on her designer tote. She paused at row 2, frowning at the seat beside Naomi 2B. Her expression stiffened. She turned to the nearest attendant. Excuse me, there must be a mistake. My seat is 2B. The young flight attendant, Nora Fields, checked the manifest. Yes, ma'am, that's correct. Right next to 2A. Margaret's voice dropped but stayed sharp. I'm sorry, but I was told this was a premium comfort section. It is. Ma'am, Nora said carefully. Both 2A and 2B are premium seats. Margaret hesitated, eyes flicking toward Naomi, who sat quietly with her notebook open, her lips pressed together. I'd rather not sit here. Is there another seat available? Perhaps further forward, Nora's smile faltered. I can check, ma'am, but the cabin is full. Naomi kept her eyes on her notes, pretending to read, but every word from the aisle reached her like a slow echo. She had heard this before, different words, same tone. the kind that wrapped prejudice in politeness. A senior attendant approached Dana Myers, the flight supervisor, experienced and confident. Her heels clicked softly on the carpet as she arrived. "What seems to be the issue?" Dana asked. Margaret lowered her voice. "It's not an issue. I just expected a different arrangement. I prefer a seat where I feel comfortable." Dana glanced at Naomi, then back at Margaret. There was a split second of hesitation, small but heavy. Then, with the practiced diplomacy of someone used to smoothing discomfort, she said, "Dr. Sinclair, would you mind terribly if we relocated you to another seat, just to make sure everyone's comfortable before takeoff?" The words hung in the air, gentle, rational, impossible to mistake. Naomi looked up, meeting Dana's eyes. Her voice was calm, almost kind. "Why would my presence make her uncomfortable?" Dana's throat tightened. "It's nothing personal. Of course. Just a misunderstanding." Naomi's smile was slight but unwavering. "I purchased 2A, and I'll remain in 2A. Please seat, Ms. Holt and 2B is assigned." A quiet hum ran through the nearby passengers. No one spoke, but several heads turned slightly, watching. Margaret's face flushed pink. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, clutching her handbag. "I paid for peace, not confrontation." Naomi returned to her notebook, writing one deliberate line across the page. "Dignity isn't loud." 10 minutes passed before the last passengers boarded. The doors closed. The engines sighed alive. Dana checked her tablet again. Uneasy, she leaned toward Naomi one more time. "Dr. Sinclair," she said softly, "if it's truly no trouble, there's an empty business class seat just a few rows behind. It would help us avoid any unpleasantness." Naomi turned her pen between her fingers, then set it down. Her gaze was steady. "Unpleasantness," she repeated, for whom Dana hesitated. "We just want everyone to have a good flight." "I do too," Naomi said, "and sometimes that means not moving the wrong person." There was no anger in her tone, only a calm finality that left no room for negotiation. Dana exhaled and nodded slowly. "Understood." She turned away, but Naomi could feel the tension ripple through the aisle like static. Margaret muttered something under her breath, something about entitlement and standards. Naomi looked out the window. Out. The runway lights blinked in even lines, stretching into gray mist. Inside her chest, a small, familiar ache pulsed. Not rage, not fear. Just the quiet exhaustion of living the same scene, again and again, in different rooms, different languages, different faces. The captain's voice came through the intercom, cheerful and distant. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Helios Air Flight 204 to San Francisco. Estimated flight time, 5 hours and 48 minutes. Naomi listened without really hearing. Her reflection in the window looked steady, but her mind moved beneath the surface, calculating, considering. She thought of the systems she built for Helios AI programs that flagged unethical data use, bias in hiring, unfair decision patterns. She had designed them to protect human dignity through logic and proof. And yet, here she was, watching a real-world algorithm of bias run its course in real time. She breathed deeply, slow and measured, the way she learned years ago when anger threatened to cloud reason. Then she reached into her briefcase and touched her phone. A single name glowed on the screen: Elliot Rourke, Helios Group. She didn't press call. Not yet. Instead, she whispered so softly that only she could hear. "It's always the same test. How much silence can justice endure outside?" A light drizzle began to trace thin rivers down the glass. The engines roared. The plane started to roll. The plane was half full now, the sound of overhead bins clicking shut echoing like soft percussion. Naomi sat still in 2A, her notebook now closed, her thoughts drifting somewhere between the engine hum and the low murmur of travelers settling in. The air felt charged, quiet but electric, as if the entire cabin held its breath without knowing why. Across the aisle, Margaret Holt's voice broke that silence. "Excuse me," she said, flagging down Nora, the young attendant who had just walked past with a tray of champagne. "Are you sure there isn't another seat? I can't believe this is the arrangement." Nora's cheeks flushed slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We're completely full today." Margaret frowned. "Then find someone to switch. I paid for peace, not tension." The word peace hung strangely in the air, as if she owned its meaning. Naomi didn't turn her head, but her spine straightened. She could feel the invisible weight of expectation pressing against her back, the unspoken demand to accommodate, to shrink, to disappear for comfort's sake. Dana Myers appeared again, her tone gentle but rehearsed. "Ma'am," she said to Naomi, "we're trying to make sure everyone enjoys the flight. There's a seat in business class 4D, plenty of space, and we'd be happy to offer complimentary service as an apology for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience," Naomi repeated softly, finally looking up. Her eyes were calm, but there was steel behind them. "Whose inconvenience are you apologizing for?" Dana hesitated. Her mouth opened, then closed. Around them, passengers tried to look busy, their eyes fixed on phones or magazines, but the tension was impossible to ignore. Margaret gave a small, dismissive laugh. "Oh, please, let's not make this dramatic. I simply prefer not to sit here." Surely she understands that. "She," Naomi said quietly, "has a name." Margaret blinked, caught off guard by the even tone. "I didn't mean I know what you meant," Naomi said. Then she turned to Dana. "I'll remain in my seat. Thank you." Dana's jaw tightened. "Of course. Dr. Sinclair." She stepped back, embarrassed, retreating toward the galley. Nora lingered for a second, uncertainty flickering across her face, then followed her supervisor. Naomi exhaled through her nose. The rhythm of the plane announcements, footsteps, the faint hiss of air conditioning became background noise to the quiet conversation inside her own head. "It's always the same tone," she thought. Soft voices, pleasant smiles, the same choreography of discomfort. She remembered being 24, the youngest systems analyst in a room of older white men, told to fetch coffee because they thought she was the intern. She hadn't corrected them then. She'd simply delivered the data presentation and watched their faces change. She'd learned early that silence could be power, but only if you chose when to break it. Now, seated in 2A, she wondered if silence had done too much protecting and not enough changing. Margaret shifted beside her, sighing audibly. "Unbelievable," she muttered, just loud enough. "These days you can't say anything without being accused of something." Naomi turned slightly, her voice low and even. "Sometimes saying less is the beginning of understanding." Margaret rolled her eyes. "I didn't ask for a lecture, and I didn't ask for a relocation," Naomi replied, returning her gaze to the window. A few rows back, Jason Lee, the journalist, quietly lifted his phone. He didn't record, yet just observed. Years in media had taught him that sometimes the smallest spark could reveal a much larger fire. Something about Naomi's stillness drew his attention. She wasn't just enduring humiliation. She was measuring it. Dana reappeared at the front of the cabin, speaking softly into her intercom. Naomi couldn't hear the words, but she could tell from Dana's posture that the conversation was about her. It always was. The captain's voice came through a moment later, polite and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're finalizing preparations for departure. Please fasten your seatbelts." Nora began her safety checks down the aisle. When she reached Naomi's row, she hesitated again, Dr. Sinclair, she said softly. I just wanted to say some of us don't agree with how this is being handled. Naomi looked up, her expression softening. Thank you, Nora. That means more than you think. The young woman gave a faint smile and moved on. Outside, the drizzle turned to sleet, streaking the window with silver threads. The engines rumbled deeper, stronger. Margaret tapped impatiently on her phone, sending an email that probably began with, "You wouldn't believe what just happened to me." Naomi's phone vibrated once on the armrest. A message preview appeared. Flight confirmed Helios contract meeting 10 a.m. Pacific. Elliot Rourke. Her finger hovered over the screen. She opened a secure channel, the kind used for confidential corporate communications. The display showed a single contact, Elliot Rourke, Helios Group. For a few seconds she simply stared at the name, her reflection faintly visible on the glass. She thought of her company's code of ethics, the policies she'd helped draft for Helios itself. The irony stung. Then Margaret spoke again, as if to herself, but loud enough for the row to hear. Some people just like attention, always playing the victim. Naomi's hand tightened around her phone. The words weren't new, but they still cut. Not because of their cruelty, but because of their predictability. She turned slowly toward Margaret. Do you always talk about strangers this way? Margaret blinked, unprepared for the confrontation. I wasn't. You were, Naomi said gently. You just didn't expect a response. For a moment, their eyes met. Margaret looked away first. Naomi unlocked her phone and opened the voice call screen. The interface glowed pale blue, waiting for one touch. She hesitated. There was power in that moment, and she felt its weight. She remembered her father, a school principal in Atlanta, who once told her after a student insulted him publicly, "You don't raise your voice to be heard. You raise your integrity so they have to listen." She had built her entire company on that principle, but sometimes, she thought, integrity needed amplification. She pressed call. The line connected instantly. Naomi came Elliot's voice, low, steady, carrying the hum of a distant office. "Good morning, Elliot," she said evenly. "Your airline has a problem." He paused. "Talk to me." She kept her tone professional, clinical. "Your flight crew is attempting to relocate a paying passenger me because another refuses to sit beside a black woman. It's not an isolated error. It's a pattern." There was silence on the line. Then Elliot's voice sharpened. "Stay in your seat. Don't argue. I'll handle it." "I'm not angry," she said quietly. "I'm tired, but I'm done being quiet." "Understood." Elliot replied, "Give me 10 minutes." She ended the call. Margaret laughed softly. Calling your lawyer Naomi met her gaze, unflinching. "No, my accountability partner." Margaret frowned. Whatever that means. It means someone who still believes justice works if you remind it to. The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, "we've received a brief operational delay from ground control. Please remain seated." Margaret groaned audibly. "Oh, for heaven's sake." Naomi closed her eyes and let the vibration of the engines settle in her chest. There was no satisfaction, no smile, just a quiet steadiness. Outside, sleet turned to snow, softening the runway lights into halos. Across the aisle, Jason lowered his phone, now recording. Something was unfolding, something far larger than a seat dispute. Naomi didn't move. She simply looked out the window as flakes traced white lines across the glass and whispered, almost to herself, 10 minutes. The engines idled. The cabin held its breath again. And somewhere across the terminal, a phone rang in the Helios executive office. For a few seconds after the captain's announcement, the aircraft was wrapped in an uneasy quiet. Naomi could hear the ticking of her own pulse. Across the aisle, Margaret Holt adjusted her scarf and muttered to no one in particular. Only in America would courtesy become a crime. The sentence rolled through the cabin like a cold draft. Nobody replied. A man in 3A coughed softly and looked away. Naomi rested her phone on the armrest, screen down. 10 minutes. That was all Elliot Rourke had asked for. She didn't know what he would do in that time, but she knew what he could do. Elliot wasn't just the CEO of Helios Group. He controlled the systems that controlled the skies. If he made a call, someone somewhere would listen. Still, she felt no triumph. She felt a quiet sadness how easily people created storms out of skin. How exhausting it was to exist inside someone else's discomfort. Her mother used to say, "When people can't define you, they fear you. Don't let their fear design your peace." Dana Myers walked by again, pretending to check the overhead compartments. Her eyes avoided Naomi's, but guilt flickered across her face like a flash of light. Naomi caught it. She didn't need anger, she needed acknowledgement. Just one honest glance. It didn't come. Jason Lee, the journalist, tilted his head, observing. He had seen fights on flights before, but this was different. The woman in 2A wasn't raising her voice, wasn't demanding attention. She was waiting like a calm tide that could turn without warning. Jason quietly opened his notes app. Helios Air Incident, Seat 2A. He typed, outside the window. Snow streaked sideways across the tarmac. Inside, the air felt too warm. Margaret sighed loudly and pressed her call button. Nora appeared. "Yes, ma'am." "When will we actually leave?" Margaret asked. "Some of us have important places to be." Nora's polite smile wavered. "I'll check with the captain." Naomi turned her head slightly. "I'm sure they're working as fast as they can." Margaret responded without looking at her. "I wasn't speaking to you." "I noticed," Naomi said, her tone still level, "but your words didn't deserve silence." Margaret's face reddened, a line forming between her brows. "You seem to enjoy this attention." Naomi met her eyes. "Attention is what happens when people finally see what they've ignored." For a second, Margaret seemed to search for a comeback but found none. She looked away sharply, clutching her designer purse like a shield. Dana reappeared from the front cabin and leaned toward Margaret. "Ms. Holt, can I speak with you for a moment?" Her voice was hushed. They stepped toward the galley, where Naomi could only see fragments Dana's hands moving as she spoke. Margaret's gestures sharp, dismissive. It didn't matter. Naomi knew the rhythm of such conversations. Someone would suggest patience, someone would claim offense, and the air would thicken with fragile politeness. She checked her watch. 9 minutes. In her mind, she drifted to the last boardroom she'd sat in the polished walnut table, the men discussing ethics like it was a product. She had presented her company's AI system that morning, an algorithm designed to detect discrimination in service industries by scanning tone, word choice, and behavior patterns. Irony, she thought now, that the system might have flagged this very flight. The soft vibration of her phone pulled her back. A message from Elliot flashed. "Hold position. Do not engage further. We're coming. The word carried weight. It meant he wasn't just sending a message. He was sending people. Naomi slipped the phone back into her pocket and folded her hands together. Nora walked past again, whispering almost too quietly. "Dr. Sinclair? Everything okay?" Naomi smiled gently. "It will be—" The young attendant hesitated. "I think they're delaying takeoff because of what's happening." "I know," Naomi said. "Sometimes a delay is the only way forward." Nora didn't quite understand, but the words stayed with her as she returned to the galley. 5 minutes later, the captain's voice returned, slightly strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, We're experiencing a minor technical hold. Please remain seated. Jason lifted his phone. The timestamp ticked at the top of his screen. He began recording quietly, respectfully. He didn't know what story he was catching, but he sensed it was larger than anyone realized. Margaret returned to her seat, visibly irritated. "They're saying there's a systems issue," she said aloud, emphasizing the word systems as if it were Naomi's fault. Funny how everything's suddenly broken. Naomi opened her notebook again. In the margin, she wrote a single line. "Sometimes silence is strategy, not surrender." Margaret noticed but said nothing. Through the window, Naomi saw two figures in black coats walking briskly along the jet bridge toward the plane. Their badges flashed under fluorescent light. She exhaled. Right on time. The door opened with a hiss. A rush of cold air swept through the front cabin. Dana straightened immediately, professionalism snapping back into place. "Welcome aboard," she began. But her words faltered when she recognized one of the newcomers, Ava Chen, Chief Ethics Officer of Helios Group, and Thomas Grayson, the Director of Operations. Passengers stirred, whispering. Jason's heart raced as he adjusted his phone. Naomi didn't move. Her eyes met Ava's briefly, a silent acknowledgement between two women who understood what this moment meant. Ava addressed Dana softly but firmly. "We received a direct call from headquarters. There's been an incident reported on this flight." Dana nodded, pale. "Yes, ma'am, but it's a misunderstanding." "Then let's clear it up," Ava said, stepping further inside. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "Is this really necessary?" Thomas Grayson looked at her, expression unreadable. "Ma'am, we'll determine that." The entire cabin seemed to shrink to the space between rows 2 and 3. Naomi finally spoke, her tone steady. "I believe the issue began when I was asked to move for another passenger's comfort." Thomas nodded slowly. "And you declined." "I did," she said, "because dignity is not negotiable." Ava's eyes softened, just slightly. "Thank you, Dr. Sinclair. Please remain seated." She turned to Dana. "May I see your crew log?" Dana handed over her tablet, fingers trembling slightly. Ava scrolled, her brows knitting tighter with each swipe. 3 similar complaints in the last 2 months, she murmured, all involving passengers of color. None escalated to review. Thomas glanced toward the cockpit. "Captain, pause the engines." The hum died instantly. A chill passed through the cabin as the realization sank in. The flight wasn't delayed by weather. It was paused by principle. Margaret whispered sharply, "This is absurd. She's making a spectacle out of nothing." Naomi looked at her calmly. "If equality feels like a spectacle, maybe you've forgotten what normal should be." The sentence landed with quiet precision. Even Jason stopped typing for a moment. Ava straightened. "Until we complete our review. Flight 204 will not depart." Gasps rippled. Someone in row 3 groaned. Another muttered under their breath. But most stayed silent, eyes darting between Naomi and the executives. Naomi folded her notebook, sliding it into her bag. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The message had already taken flight. Ava leaned closer. "Dr. Sinclair, Mr. Rourke sends his regards. He said to tell you. Justice is cleared for takeoff." Naomi nodded once. "Tell him thank you." Outside, the snow had stopped. Inside, the engines slept, waiting. Naomi leaned back in her seat, calm returning to her like a tide. The system had begun to wake up, and all it took was one calm voice, one hidden power, and a call that refused to be ignored. The engines had gone silent, but the air inside the cabin buzzed with tension. Some passengers exchanged nervous glances, others pulled out their phones, recording discreetly. The snow outside glowed against the window lights, pale and quiet, while inside, the weight of unspoken history pressed against every seatbelt. Naomi remained seated in 2A, calm, her fingers lightly touching the edge of her closed notebook. She could hear the faint hum of the auxiliary power unit, the mechanical heart still beating beneath the aircraft's belly. Margaret Holt sat rigid beside her, jaw clenched, phone in hand, typing furiously. Her nails tapped against the screen, each click like an accusation. Across the aisle, Jason Lee was no longer pretending to check email. He was recording openly now, his camera aimed low, respectful but ready. His instincts told him that this wasn't just a corporate misunderstanding. It was a defining moment. Ava Chen and Thomas Grayson stood near the cockpit, speaking with the captain. Their voices were hushed but firm. The first officer occasionally nodded, his face pale, uncertain if this was still an airline matter or something far above his pay grade. Naomi watched them quietly, feeling the storm settle into its true shape. She had spent years navigating boardrooms where decisions were disguised as diplomacy. But this was different. This was raw, visible, unavoidable. Finally, Ava turned to the passengers. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ava Chen, Chief Ethics Officer with Helios Group. We're conducting a review of a discrimination incident reported on this aircraft. We apologize for the delay, but fairness must never compete with convenience." A ripple of reactions followed, murmurs, sighs, a few scattered nods. Someone in row 5 muttered, "Good for her." Another whispered, "I just want to get home." Margaret raised her voice. "This is ridiculous. I have meetings, appointments, people waiting. Are we all being held hostage because one woman decided to play victim?" Ava's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, this review concerns everyone on this flight. When bias takes place in a shared space, silence makes witnesses of us all." The words struck harder than raised voices could. Even Jason lowered his phone for a second, absorbing the gravity of what he was witnessing. Dana Myers, the flight supervisor, shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Chen, if I may, I never intended harm. I was just trying to prevent a conflict." "Conflict arises," Ava replied, "when people mistake discrimination for discomfort." The statement hung there, heavy and unarguable. Naomi finally spoke. "We all want to get home," she said quietly, "but I won't trade someone's humanity for punctuality. For a moment." Her words softened the air. A woman in row 4, Latina, gave a small nod of support. A man in a business suit looked down, ashamed. Margaret, though, scoffed. "You people are always turning everything into a racial issue. Maybe if you stopped looking for offense." Naomi turned her head slowly, her voice low but precise. "I don't look for offense, Ms. Holt. It tends to find me." Jason's camera caught that line perfectly. He didn't need to add commentary. Truth didn't require embellishment. Outside, the snow began to thicken. The lights along the runway blurred like distant stars. Inside, a new sound broke through the sharp chime of the captain's intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an ongoing corporate compliance investigation, Flight 204 is now temporarily grounded. We appreciate your patience." The cabin erupted in disbelief. Passengers whispered, sighed, some groaned in protest. Margaret threw up her hands. Grounded. For this nonsense, Naomi stayed perfectly still, her posture upright, her face serene. She wasn't celebrating. This wasn't victory. It was visibility. Dana looked on the verge of tears. Nora, the young attendant, reached out and gently touched her arm. "It's not too late to do the right thing," she whispered. Dana blinked back emotion. "Maybe it is." Ava approached Naomi's seat. "Dr. Sinclair, thank you for your patience. Mr. Rourke has instructed me to make a full on-site report. You'll be receiving a written apology from Helios before we even leave the ground." I didn't do this for an apology, Naomi said softly. I did it because pretending nothing happened never made anything better. Ava nodded. That's precisely why we're here. Margaret glared, her cheeks flushed. This is absurd. I know people on the Helios board this will be corrected. Ava turned her gaze toward her. It already is being corrected. Ms. Holt? The woman's jaw tightened, realizing too late that she was speaking to someone far beyond her influence. At that moment, Naomi's phone buzzed again. A new message appeared from Elliot Rourke Ground Review confirmed. Public statement pending. You did the right thing. Her eyes softened. I hope so, she typed back. But right doesn't always feel good in the moment. He replied instantly. Change never does. Jason watched as Ava quietly instructed the flight crew to disembark row by row while they conducted documentation. The process was orderly, professional, almost ceremonial. It was as if the act of fairness itself demanded choreography. Passengers began to move, murmuring their thoughts as they passed Naomi's row. Some offered brief nods of support. One woman said softly, "You shouldn't have had to go through that." Naomi smiled faintly. But maybe someone else won't have to. Now. Margaret stood, grabbing her bag with a huff. This isn't over, she snapped. Naomi looked up at her. You're right. It's just beginning. Margaret froze, unsure how to respond. For the first time, she seemed smaller, as though stripped of the invisible armor that privilege provided. She turned away without another word. When the aisle cleared, Jason lingered near the exit, hesitant. Dr. Sinclair, he said softly, I'm a journalist. Off the record, I've seen a lot of people lose their temper when treated unfairly. But you stayed calm. How Naomi smiled, weary but genuine. Because I've learned that dignity speaks louder when it whispers. Jason nodded slowly. I'll remember that. Outside the plane, the air was cold, crisp with the scent of jet fuel and snow. Naomi stepped onto the jet bridge, her breath fogging in front of her. She could hear the low murmur of passengers behind her, the shuffle of movement, the clack of rolling luggage. Ava walked beside her. You realize you just made history, right? Naomi shook her head. No, I just reminded it to show up on time. Ava laughed softly. Elliot said something similar. He's arranging a public statement for the morning. This won't stay quiet. It shouldn't, Naomi said. Not anymore. As they reached the gate, reporters were already gathering alerts spreading faster than she expected. Jason was among them now, blending in but ready to write the truth. Naomi looked out through the terminal glass at the still aircraft on the snowy runway. It sat motionless, lights glowing faintly under falling snow, a metal monument to a moment when one person refused to move so that change could, she whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. Sometimes you don't take off to rise. You stop to make others see where you've been grounded. The cameras outside began to flash. Naomi turned away, straightening her coat, her eyes steady, her steps deliberate. Tonight, a flight didn't take off, but something much greater did. The terminal buzzed with voices, cameras, and the restless rhythm of news breaking in real time. Travelers craned their necks to glimpse the woman who had, with one phone call, stopped a flight. Reporters pressed forward, microphones flashing like impatient lightning, each one desperate to capture the soundbite that would define the story. Naomi Sinclair stood beneath the glowing Helios air sign, her dark coat dusted with snow, her posture unwavering. She wasn't performing. She was simply standing calm, dignified, and utterly unshaken. Ava Chen hovered just behind her, speaking quietly with security officers, ensuring no one crossed the boundary of respect. Jason Lee, the journalist who had witnessed everything, stood a few feet away. He had his recorder ready, but his eyes were softer than the rest. He didn't want the headline. He wanted the heartbeat behind it. A woman from a national network leaned forward. Dr. Sinclair, is it true you forced Helios Air to ground the plane because of a seating disagreement? Naomi turned toward her, eyes level and clear. It wasn't a disagreement. It was discrimination. And I didn't force anyone to ground anything. I made a call to accountability, not vengeance. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras adjusted focus. Another reporter shouted, "What exactly happened on Flight 204? Naomi hesitated, then spoke slowly, each word deliberate. I was asked to move my seat because another passenger and executive felt uncomfortable sitting next to me. The crew attempted to accommodate her request instead of addressing the prejudice behind it. I refused to move, and I called the person responsible for ensuring Helios operates with integrity. A reporter from a local paper spoke next, her tone respectful. Were you surprised by how quickly they responded? Naomi smiled faintly. No. I built the systems that made that possible. That line drew collective breath. Cameras clicked faster. Jason noted how her words weren't laced with anger, they carried conviction instead. She wasn't attacking. She was teaching through calmness, forcing the world to listen through composure. Margaret Holt, standing further down the terminal surrounded by airline staff, was watching the same scene unfold on a live broadcast screen. Her lips were tight, her eyes darting nervously. The confidence she wore like perfume on the plane was fading fast. She tried to call someone, her assistant, maybe her lawyer, but the call went unanswered. Inside the crowd, a soft voice spoke up. Dr. Sinclair, do you think grounding the flight was fair to the other passengers? Naomi met the question without hesitation. Fairness isn't about speed or convenience. It's about correction. Sometimes progress delays us, but only to make sure we all arrive with our dignity intact. There was silence after that. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Ava stepped forward gently. That's all for tonight. Everyone. Helios will issue a formal statement in the morning. She motioned to security, who began to part the crowd. But Naomi raised a hand slightly. One more thing, she said. Her voice carried easily through the gathered crowd. Quiet, but steady. What happened on that plane wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a reflection of something deeper, the reflex to protect comfort over conscience. This isn't about punishing individuals. It's about building systems that don't allow prejudice to hide behind policy. That statement shifted the energy in the room. It wasn't just an answer. It was a mirror held up to an entire society. Jason felt the hairs on his arms rise. He scribbled down her words verbatim. He knew when a sentence would echo far beyond its moment. As the press began to disperse, Ava leaned close to Naomi. Elliot just texted, "The internal review is already underway. He's preparing a joint address with the Helios board tomorrow morning. He wants you there." Naomi nodded. "Tell him I'll be there, but not for publicity, for permanence." Outside the terminal, the snow had turned to a gentle mist. The flashing lights from news vans painted the wet pavement in red and blue. Naomi walked slowly through the crowd, escorted by Ava and 2 security officers. A few passengers who had been on Flight 204 approached shyly. A middle-aged woman said, "I was in row 6. I didn't say anything when it happened. I should have. I'm sorry." Naomi smiled softly. "Silence is a starting point, not an ending. You're speaking now, that's what matters." The woman nodded, eyes wet. "Thank you for standing your ground. You made me think about things I didn't want to." Jason watched from a distance, his camera lowered. He wasn't ready to leave yet. He approached Naomi as she reached the exit. "Dr. Sinclair," he said gently, "I think the world's going to talk about this for a long time." Naomi glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "Then let's make sure they're talking about the right part." He tilted his head. Which part is that? The part where nobody shouted, and yet the truth was loud. Jason smiled slightly. That's going in the article. She gave a small nod. Make it about more than me. Make it about why it still happens. I will, he said quietly. And for what it's worth, I think you just changed more than one airline policy tonight. Naomi looked past him toward the parked plane, still lit but grounded under a silent snowfall. Change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to move. Later that night, alone in her hotel suite overlooking the city, Naomi sat by the window, the skyline flickering like a circuit board. Her phone buzzed with messages, colleagues, friends, even strangers praising her courage. But she didn't feel powerful. She felt heavy, reflective. She replayed the entire scene in her mind, the look on Margaret's face, the uncertainty in Dana's eyes, the quiet bravery in Nora's whisper. She thought of her father, who'd once told her, "Dignity is the one seat no one can take from you, but you'll spend your life reminding the world it exists." She smiled sadly at that memory. He'd been right. A soft knock came at her door. It was Ava, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Couldn't sleep," Ava said. "Thought you might not either." Naomi gestured for her to sit. "You were incredible today," Ava said. "You handled it better than most would have." "I didn't handle it," Naomi replied. "I just refused to bend." Ava sipped her tea. "Helios has already suspended the entire flight crew for investigation. Margaret Holt's employer reached out too, apparently. She's not as untouchable as she thought." Naomi looked out at the city. "Consequences are easy. Culture is harder. We'll see if this becomes something lasting." Ava studied her. "You're not just fighting for yourself, are you?" Naomi's voice softened. "I'm fighting for the version of the world I promised my father I'd help build, one where no one has to make a phone call to be treated with respect." Outside, a siren wailed faintly, fading into the night. Naomi set her tea down, her gaze distant but resolute. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "we begin something bigger." The city lights reflected in her eyes like small fires, and in that moment, the woman who had grounded a plane with one call wasn't thinking about headlines or history. She was thinking about healing, how real change begins not with outrage, but with the quiet decision to stop letting wrong things fly. The city woke beneath a pale sky, streaked with soft light that carried the chill of a sleepless night. News outlets buzzed with the story, "Black CEO grounds flight after facing discrimination." Every headline twisted the truth slightly, but the essence remained. Naomi Sinclair had drawn a line, and the world was listening. In the glass-walled headquarters of Helios Group, tension hummed like static. Reporters clustered outside, cameras ready for the official press briefing. Inside the boardroom, executives whispered, exchanging glances that betrayed both worry and curiosity. Elliot Rourke stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, calm but resolute. Across from him, Ava Chen and Naomi sat side by side. "Naomi," Elliot said quietly, "you know this isn't just about an airline. It's about every boardroom, every company that pretends bias is just bad luck." Naomi nodded. "Then let's stop pretending." Ava opened her laptop, reviewing the statement draft. "We'll admit fault, outline reform, and establish a public ethics review board. But Elliot, this means changing how Helios operates at every level. Are you ready for that?" He looked out through the window at the skyline. "If the truth costs us comfort, then it's a fair price." Naomi studied him for a moment, then said softly, "Change doesn't start from anger. It starts from courage. Let's give people permission to be better." Downstairs, the press waited. Jason Lee stood among them, recorder in hand. He had written his article overnight, a piece that was already trending online. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. His words were being quoted everywhere. even on morning television. But he wasn't proud yet. He wanted to hear what Helios would say now, publicly, with the world watching. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors opened. Elliot, Ava, and Naomi stepped onto the small stage. Cameras flashed. The hum of voices died down, and the air filled with the sound of anticipation. Elliot spoke first. "Good morning. I'm Elliot Rourke, CEO of Helios Group. Last night, one of our passengers, Dr. Naomi Sinclair, experienced discrimination aboard our flight. The company she trusted to carry her failed to carry her dignity. That failure belongs to all of us." He paused, letting the words settle. Helios operates thousands of flights each year, but integrity cannot be counted in numbers. It's measured in moments like the one we failed to honor. Today, that changes. He gestured toward Naomi. The cameras shifted, zooming in. Naomi stood, poised but humble, her voice steady as she addressed the room. "I didn't ask to be anyone's symbol," she began. "I was just a traveler who paid for a seat and expected respect. What happened to me wasn't unique. It happens every day, in airports, in offices, in quiet corners where people learn to shrink to stay safe. But I refuse to shrink, because silence, after a while, becomes participation." The room fell completely still. Reporters leaned forward. Even the security guards by the doors seemed frozen. Naomi continued, "When I made that call, it wasn't to punish anyone. It was to remind us all systems don't fail by accident. They fail because people stay comfortable inside them. I wanted to make sure comfort no longer outweighed conscience." She looked around the room, meeting eyes that darted between guilt and admiration. "So Helios will change, not through slogans or statements, but through structure. From today, every report of discrimination will go to an independent review board with real authority. Every employee will undergo empathy and ethics training, not as punishment, but as preparation for a world that demands awareness." Ava stepped forward, adding firmly, "We're calling it the Sinclair Standard. It's not just policy, it's a promise that equity won't be optional, and respect won't depend on who's watching." Flashes filled the room. Jason's hand trembled slightly as he recorded. The phrase Sinclair Standard would trend globally before noon. Margaret Holt was watching the broadcast from her apartment. Her phone was filled with missed calls from her company she had been suspended pending review. The same arrogance that had once insulated her now suffocated her. She muted the TV, staring at her own reflection in the darkened screen. For the first time, she realized that the discomfort she'd caused others was now her own mirror. Back at Helios headquarters, a journalist raised her hand. "Dr. Sinclair, what do you want people to remember from all this?" Naomi considered for a long moment that justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks quietly down a jet bridge and asks for the seat it already paid for. Soft laughter rippled through the room, followed by applause. It wasn't the loud, performative kind, it was warm, genuine, grateful. Elliot stepped back to the podium. "There's one more thing," he said, effective immediately. Helios Air Flight 204 is being reclassified as the first mission under our new code Operation Equal Sky. We'll use the footage, the testimony, and Dr. Sinclair's experience as the foundation for a mandatory industry-wide ethics certification. We'll invite other airlines to join us. No one should have to call for respect. It should already be built into the system. Reporters began shouting follow-ups, cameras flashing faster now. But Naomi's gaze drifted toward the window, where sunlight was beginning to pierce the clouds. It was as if the storm had finally broken. After the conference ended, Jason caught up with her near the elevator. "Dr. Sinclair," he said, "I wanted to thank you. What you said, it's changing things already." Naomi smiled softly. Then make sure it changes for the right reasons." He nodded. "The Sinclair Standard, that's a powerful name." "It's not about a name," she said. "It's about memory. Systems forget fast. People need stories to remind them." Jason hesitated, then asked, "Would you let me write the follow-up about who you are, not just what happened?" Naomi looked thoughtful. "Maybe, but not yet. Let's see what the world does with the truth first." They exchanged a brief handshake, one built on quiet mutual respect. When she finally stepped outside, the city felt different. People recognized her now. Some smiled, some clapped, some simply nodded. A woman holding a coffee cup whispered, "Thank you," as Naomi passed. A young man held up his phone to show a headline. She didn't cancel a flight. She lifted a ceiling. Ava joined her at the car, slipping her briefcase onto the seat. "You realize we've just started something that won't stop," Naomi smiled faintly. "Good. Then let's make sure it doesn't lose its meaning." They drove away through the city, where news vans and billboards already carried her image. The caption bold across the screen, "The Sinclair Standard Dignity Takes Flight." Naomi leaned her head back against the seat, exhaustion creeping in. She thought of her father again, his steady voice echoing, "When the world tells you to move, stand until it learns why you can't." She closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm still standing, Dad." Outside, the first true sunlight of the day spilled across the streets of New York, catching the glass towers in gold. It looked like hope, the kind built not from headlines, but from the quiet endurance of a woman who refused to move. By noon, Naomi's name had traveled farther than she ever intended it to. Her image, composed, calm, and dignified, was replayed on every major news network. Commentators debated whether she was a hero or a disruptor. Social media erupted with hashtags: "The Sinclair Standard," "The Grounded for Justice," "Equal Sky." Across offices and classrooms, people whispered her name with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Inside Viridian Systems headquarters, Naomi's own team watched from a large conference room screen. Engineers, analysts, and interns gathered in silence. When the press conference ended, applause broke out, not loud, but full of pride. One of the interns whispered, "She did what we always hoped someone would." At that very moment, Naomi sat in the back of a car, her phone buzzing non-stop. She ignored most of the messages until one caught her attention. It was from Nora Fields, the young flight attendant, Dr. Sinclair. "I just wanted to thank you. I resigned this morning. I realize silence isn't safety. It's surrender. I want to do better. Thank you for showing me that." Naomi smiled gently, typing back, "You don't need to thank me, Nora. Just keep doing the right thing, even when no one is filming." She set her phone down, the city blurring past the window. It struck her how one moment of dignity could ripple through the lives of strangers, an intern inspired, a flight attendant awakening, a CEO rethinking his company's soul. But the thought carried weight, too. Change was never just victory. It was responsibility. When she arrived at her office, her assistant, Jordan, met her at the door. "You've had 32 interview requests, 6 collaboration proposals, and the mayor's office just called they want you to speak at the city's equity forum next week." Naomi exhaled slowly. "Tell them I'll respond after I breathe." Jordan smiled. Already told them that. They walked down the hallway toward her glass office overlooking the Hudson. The walls were filled with framed blueprints, early drafts of Viridian's technology, the systems that powered safety, logistics, and now, ethical accountability across major industries. Ironically, she thought, the same tech she'd once designed to measure bias had now become the proof of her humanity. On her desk sat a sealed envelope. She opened it, recognizing Elliot Rourke's handwriting. Inside was a short note. What you grounded was never just a flight. It was a system that had stayed in the air too long. Thank you for reminding us to land where truth lives. Her throat tightened. Elliot had always been pragmatic, not poetic. That sentence, she thought, must have cost him thought and sincerity. Moments later, Ava Chen walked in carrying a stack of documents. We've already received partnership requests from 3 other airlines. They want to adopt the Sinclair standard immediately. Naomi looked up. That fast? Ava nodded. Apparently, no one wants to be the next Helios incident. Naomi gave a small smile. Fear is a start, but understanding is the goal. Ava sat across from her. You're aware this has turned you into something of a public figure, right? The media's painting you as this quiet revolutionary. Naomi sighed. Revolutionary. I just wanted to sit in peace. That's what makes it powerful. Ava said. You didn't raise your voice, you raised a mirror. And people saw themselves. Before Naomi could reply, her office intercom buzzed. Jordan's voice came through. You have a visitor. Says his name is Thomas Grayson. Naomi nodded. Send him in. Thomas entered, tall, reserved, his expression contrite. Dr. Sinclair, he said. I wanted to apologize in person. I was on that flight from the start. I saw it unfolding, and I should have intervened earlier. You did what protocol allowed, Naomi replied gently. But protocol's exactly what needs changing. He nodded. Ava's already revising procedures. And, Ms. Holt has issued a written apology. She's entering sensitivity training voluntarily. I think the reality hit her hard. Naomi looked at him thoughtfully. Growth hurts, but I hope she learns from it. Thomas hesitated before speaking again. You know, the FAA contacted Helios this morning. They want to use this case as a study in ethics for all airlines. You may have started something bigger than you realize. Naomi leaned back, her expression calm but reflective. If the world starts treating people as equals because of this, then the turbulence was worth it. Later that afternoon, she stood by her window as sunlight poured into the room. Across the river, the skyline shimmered gold. The weight she had carried for so long seemed to loosen, if only slightly. Her phone rang. It was Jason Lee. Dr. Sinclair, he said when she answered. I wanted to share something. The article hit 1 million reads in less than 6 hours. But the comments, most of them, are about their own experiences. It's like people finally have permission to talk. Naomi smiled faintly. That's the beauty of truth. It multiplies when spoken. Jason hesitated, then added, I wanted to ask what now? What happens after the standard? Her tone softened. Then comes the work that doesn't make headlines. The quiet, unglamorous kind, the policies, the training, the listening. Change isn't a storm. It's a series of steady rains. Jason wrote that down word for word. That's beautiful, he said. May I quote you? You already have. She replied with a soft laugh. By evening, Veridian Systems' inbox overflowed with messages from around the world, pilots, nurses, teachers, executives all sharing their own stories of prejudice, silence, and moments when they wished they had spoken up. Naomi read every one she could, her heart heavy and full at once. As the city darkened, she sat at her desk, writing a personal reflection for Helios's internal newsletter. To every employee reading this, she began, last night wasn't about one passenger refusing to move. It was about all of us realizing that movement without meaning leads nowhere. I believe every person deserves a seat at the table, or in this case, on the plane, without having to prove they belong there. That's not just equity. That's humanity. When she finished, she closed her laptop and looked out into the night. Somewhere across the city, people were telling her story in living rooms and offices, not as gossip, but as a kind of parable, a reminder that courage could be quiet and still move mountains. Her phone buzzed one last time before she turned it off. A message from Nora again. I'm joining Helios's new equity training team. I want to make sure no one feels what you felt that day. Naomi smiled, tears touching her lashes. She typed back, then the standard is already working. She set the phone aside, her reflection shimmering in the dark window. Behind her, the skyline of New York pulsed like a heartbeat, and though the world still spun imperfectly, for the first time in a long while, Naomi felt the steady hum of progress, subtle, patient, unstoppable. 2 weeks later, Naomi sat in a quiet cafe in downtown Manhattan, the kind of place where no one cared who you were. Rain tapped gently against the glass as she stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, lost in thought. The world had moved fast since that flight press conferences, interviews, reform meetings, but now, in this rare silence, she felt the delayed tremor of everything she had held in. A part of her was proud, another part tired. She pulled a folded note from her purse, her father's handwriting, faded with time. You don't fight to be seen. Naomi, you fight so no one else has to beg to be. He'd written that when she was 14, after a teacher accused her of cheating on an exam because her answers were too perfect. She smiled sadly. The lesson had followed her all her life. Her reverie broke when Ava Chen entered, raincoat dripping. You look like you're thinking 3 chapters ahead again, Ava teased, sliding into the seat across from her. Just reflecting, Naomi said. It's strange. Everyone's calling me brave, but all I did was say no. That's exactly why it mattered, Ava replied softly. Most people spend a lifetime saying yes to injustice just to keep peace. Naomi nodded, then leaned forward. How's the rollout going? Ava brightened. Better than we hoped. 4 major airlines have already implemented the Sinclair standard. And get this, our data shows a 40% drop in in-flight discrimination complaints within the first week of training. Naomi blinked. That fast? Turns out people behave differently when accountability has a face. Ava said, Yours. Naomi sighed, smiling faintly. I didn't want to become a symbol. You didn't choose it, Ava said. It chose you. Their conversation was interrupted by a man in a suit approaching the table. He looked hesitant, then spoke with careful politeness. Dr. Sinclair, I'm sorry to intrude. I just wanted to thank you. My daughter sent me the article about you. She's 13. She said, Dad, now I know I can sit anywhere. Naomi's throat tightened. Tell her she can sit everywhere, she replied. After he left, Ava exhaled softly. See, that's impact. Naomi looked down at her coffee, the reflection of the cafe lights trembling in the cup. Impact is heavy, she whispered. People see the change, not the cost. Ava's voice softened. You're allowed to rest. Naomi, you don't have to carry it alone. Naomi didn't answer. She just looked out at the rain, where taxis blurred into streaks of yellow. That night, back in her apartment overlooking the Hudson, she scrolled through her emails. Among the congratulations was one that stopped her, a message from Margaret Holt, Dr. Sinclair. It read, I know an apology can't undo what happened. I grew up in a world where people looked like me were taught to feel superior without earning it. You showed me how cruel that blindness can be. I've enrolled in an equality education program. I hope someday I can make amends by helping others unlearn what I was taught. Naomi read the words twice, her hands trembling slightly. The first emotion wasn't anger, it was relief. Then came sadness, because change, even from those who hurt you, was still proof that humanity could bend without breaking. The next morning, Naomi met with Elliot Rourke at the Helios headquarters. He greeted her with a warm handshake and a tired smile. You've caused quite a revolution, he said. I'd settle for evolution, Naomi replied. Elliot laughed. You always did prefer the long game. Listen, I wanted to show you something. He handed her a folder. Inside were testimonials, handwritten letters from crew members, passengers, even rival airline staff. One read, "I was on Flight 287 that day. I used to believe following orders was enough. Now I know integrity means speaking up, even when it's inconvenient." Another, "My son is biracial. For the first time, he said he wants to be a pilot because he believes the sky is fair now." Naomi's eyes glistened. "These are incredible." "They're because of you," Elliot said. "You didn't just call out a system. You made people believe it could be rebuilt." Naomi looked up. "But how do we make sure this isn't temporary? The news cycle forgets fast." Elliot nodded. "That's why we want to partner with Veridian to create a permanent ethics division. Ongoing training, real oversight, not a PR stunt policy." Naomi's heart lifted slightly. "Then we do it right. Quietly. Consistently. Like breathing." When she left his office, she paused by a mural newly installed in the Helios lobby. It showed clouds breaking open to sunlight. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Every flight carries the weight of who we choose to be." That evening, Naomi met Jason Lee again for a final interview. They sat on a park bench overlooking the river, the city glowing behind them. "You've become a symbol of justice in business," Jason said. "What's next?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe disappearing for a bit. Symbols shouldn't live forever. People should take their place." Jason nodded, recording quietly. "If you could tell the world one thing, what would it be?" Naomi thought for a long moment before answering. "That dignity shouldn't need a title, or a badge, or a CEO nameplate. It's something we owe each other, every day, even when no one's watching." Jason's camera light blinked red, recording the words that would soon go viral again. But Naomi didn't care about the views anymore. She was thinking of her father's handwriting, of Margaret's letter, of Nora teaching new recruits about empathy. She was thinking about stillness, the kind that comes not from silence, but from having said what needed to be said. As Jason packed his equipment, he turned to her. "You know, some people are saying what you did was overkill, canceling an entire flight." Naomi smiled, her voice calm and steady. "Maybe, but sometimes you have to stop a journey so everyone learns how to travel better." When he left, Naomi stayed on the bench, the wind brushing her hair. Across the river, planes took off and landed, endless patterns of departure and return. For the first time, she didn't feel anger, or even victory, just clarity. The world didn't change because she canceled a flight. It changed because she refused to let one person's prejudice dictate the altitude of her worth. And as the night sky deepened, Naomi closed her eyes and whispered to the wind, "Let this be enough." 3 months later, Naomi Sinclair found herself standing before a crowd of nearly 1,000 at the New York Equity Forum. The auditorium lights glimmered softly, and cameras waited for her every word. Yet, in that moment, she didn't feel like a CEO or a symbol. She felt like a woman who'd once just wanted to fly home without being questioned for existing. As she approached the podium, a hush fell over the room. Ava Chen, seated in the front row, gave her a reassuring nod. Elliot Rourke sat beside her, his expression proud yet humble. Behind Naomi, the large screen displayed the title of her keynote, Beyond Apologies, The Quiet Work of Equity. Naomi began slowly, her voice even and warm. 3 months ago, I made a phone call that stopped a flight. But it wasn't really about grounding an airplane, it was about grounding a truth. She paused, letting the silence breathe. That truth was simple. No one's comfort should come at the cost of another's dignity. The audience leaned forward. Cameras clicked. But Naomi didn't raise her voice. She let the quiet do the heavy lifting. The moment I said no, I wasn't trying to make history. I was trying to make peace with myself. She told the story not with drama, but with humanity. She mentioned the fear in her chest when the passenger had refused to sit beside her, the disbelief when the flight attendant sided with prejudice, and the stillness that came when she decided to act. Courage, she said softly, isn't loud. It's the whisper that says, enough. The crowd didn't cheer right away. They simply listened. And that, Naomi thought, was the greatest form of respect. After her speech, as the applause thundered, a young woman in a gray suit approached her backstage. "Dr. Sinclair," she said shyly. "I'm Rebecca Holt, Margaret Holt's daughter." Naomi's heart stilled for a moment. Margaret's daughter, Rebecca, nodded, eyes glistening. "My mother wanted me to tell you something. She said she met you once but didn't truly see you until that day. She's been volunteering with the Helios Equity Project now, and she told me to tell you. She's proud to follow your lead." Naomi smiled, tears rising unexpectedly. "Your mother's courage means more than she knows." Rebecca hesitated, then said softly, "You gave her a second chance to be human. That's the rarest gift." That night, after the forum, Naomi walked through Central Park. The city shimmered with life, and laughter floated from the distance. Her phone buzzed another message from Jason Lee. "Dr. Sinclair, the world hasn't stopped talking about your speech, but more than that, people are listening differently now. You've changed how silence sounds." Naomi smiled faintly. She looked up at the stars hidden by the city's glow. Somewhere, her father would have been proud. Somewhere, someone she'd never meet was finding their voice because of hers. She stopped near the Bethesda fountain, watching the water glisten under the lamplight. A small boy was playing nearby, his mother calling him back in Spanish. The boy tripped, and Naomi instinctively moved forward, helping him up. "Gracias," the mother said warmly. Then, after a pause, "You're Dr. Sinclair." "Right." Naomi chuckled softly. "Guilty." The woman smiled. "I work for Skylift Airlines. They just started using your standard. My team says flights feel kinder now, not just to passengers, but to each other." Naomi felt warmth spread through her chest. "That's all I ever wanted," she said. As the woman walked away, Naomi sat on the edge of the fountain, listening to the rhythmic splash of water. For the first time, she let the quiet wrap around her completely. No cameras, no questions, no fight, just peace. But deep down, she knew this was not the end. Change wasn't a chapter, it was an ongoing book, and there were still pages left to write. The next morning, she met Ava at Veridian's new ethics division. The department buzzed with young, eager minds reviewing reports, analyzing bias data, developing tools to make workplaces more humane. Nora Fields was among them, leading a team of recruits with steady confidence. "Look at her," Ava whispered with a grin. 3 months ago, she was scared to speak up. Now she's training the next generation. Naomi smiled proudly. "That's the ripple we wanted." They walked into the glass conference room where Elliot and Thomas Grayson were reviewing the latest data. "Helios incidents have dropped by 87%, Thomas said, "and our employee satisfaction index has doubled." Elliot looked at Naomi. "You turned a scandal into a standard." Naomi shook her head gently. "No, we turned it into a promise." As they discussed the next steps, expanding the standard to railways, cruise lines, and even corporate offices, Naomi noticed something small but profound. No one in the room was tense. There was laughter, there was collaboration. The culture had shifted, not by fear, but by shared conscience. When the meeting ended, Ava handed Naomi a small folder. "I thought you'd like this," she said. Inside was a photo, a group of Helios employees standing beneath the mural Naomi had seen months before, the one that read, Every flight carries the weight of who we choose to be. Below the photo was a handwritten message. Thank you for helping us choose better. That night, Naomi returned to her apartment, the city alive below. She poured herself a glass of water and opened her journal. It's not about the flight anymore, she wrote. It's about the landing, the moment when we all decide whether we've arrived at empathy or just another excuse. I think, maybe, we've landed somewhere good. She closed the book, her hand lingering on the cover. The rain began again outside, soft against the glass, rhythmic as breath. Naomi stood by the window, watching the world blur and shimmer. For the first time since that day on the plane, she smiled without hesitation. The sky no longer felt heavy, it felt open. And though she knew the fight for equality was far from over, she also knew something else with quiet certainty. She had taught the world how to listen when silence speaks. 6 months later, the morning sun stretched across the runways of JFK International, glinting off silver wings and glass towers. Dr. Naomi Sinclair stood by a terminal window, suitcase beside her, watching the planes rise one by one into a pale blue sky. It was her first time boarding a flight since that day, and though she had been in hundreds of boardrooms since, this simple act of flying again felt like a test of peace. A voice came from behind her. Dr. Sinclair, we're ready to board whenever you are. It was Thomas Grayson, now head of passenger integrity for Helios. His tone was warm, not corporate. The change in him mirrored the change in the company itself. Naomi smiled. Thank you, Thomas. I think I'll take my time this morning. He nodded, understanding. No rush. The crew wanted you to know they're honored to have you on this flight. She turned to him, amusement in her eyes. Let's just hope it takes off this time. They both laughed softly, the kind of laughter that carried healing rather than irony. As she walked toward the gate, passengers noticed her but didn't stare. Some smiled, one whispered, "That's her." Yet there was no tension, only quiet respect. Naomi handed her ticket to the attendant, who looked her in the eye and said, "Welcome aboard, Dr. Sinclair. We're grateful for you." The flight was to Seattle, where she would be speaking at an innovation summit about ethics in artificial intelligence, a topic that now, thanks to her, carried emotional as well as technical meaning. As she stepped into first class, a stewardess greeted her warmly. "Good morning. My name's Eliza. I'll be taking care of you today." Naomi took her seat, glancing out the window. For a moment, her breath caught not from fear, but from memory. She could almost see the reflection of her past self in that same seat, calm but burning inside, moments before the storm that had changed everything. Eliza leaned closer. "I wanted to tell you something. I joined Helios because of you. I watched your story when I was still in training. You made me believe this industry could be kind." Naomi smiled. "Then it's already worth it." Mid-flight, as clouds drifted below, Naomi opened her laptop to review her presentation slides, but instead she found herself staring at a folder labeled Letters. Inside were hundreds of messages from strangers, pilots, teachers, janitors, single parents, all thanking her for standing up that day. One message read, "My daughter used to hide her natural hair before job interviews. After seeing you, she doesn't anymore." Another, "I'm a pilot who once ignored discrimination in my cabin. Never again." Naomi closed the laptop gently, her eyes misted, not from pride, but from the realization that her pain had been recycled into purpose by people she'd never met. When the plane landed in Seattle, a small crowd had gathered near the gate. Students, reporters, even a few passengers who'd been on her original flight months ago. Among them was Nora Fields, now leading Helios's compassion training program. She waved as Naomi stepped out. "You came?" Naomi said, surprised. "Wouldn't miss it," Nora replied. You taught me what silence costs. Now I make sure no one pays that price again." They hugged briefly. Quietly. No cameras. No flash. Just two people bound by change. Later that afternoon, Naomi stood before a hall of innovators, scientists, and policy leaders. Her speech wasn't long, but it was alive with stillness, as though every pause carried meaning. "Technology," she said, "isn't just about what we create. It's about what we choose to care about while creating. Justice doesn't start in laws or systems, it starts in the human heart." The day I canceled that flight, I didn't do it out of anger. I did it to remind us that fairness isn't optional. It's the foundation of everything that flies. When she finished, the audience rose not in a roar, but in an extended silence that spoke louder than applause. Afterward, she walked along Seattle's harbor with Ava Chen, who had flown in for the event. The air smelled of salt and cedar. Ava looked at her friend and said, "Do you realize you've become the quiet conscience of an entire industry?" Naomi chuckled softly. "If I am, I hope they don't fall asleep." They stopped by the edge of the pier, watching the ferries move across the water. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't said no that day?" Ava asked. "Every now and then," Naomi admitted, "and I realized the silence would have been worse, not just for me, but for everyone who needed to hear that no." Ava nodded, eyes shining. "That's why you'll always be more than a headline." Later that evening, Naomi checked into her hotel room overlooking the Puget Sound. She stood by the window, the horizon painted in streaks of gold and violet. On her nightstand sat a letter, delivered earlier by Helios's Seattle office. She opened it carefully. "Dear Dr. Sinclair, I'm writing to tell you something simple. I was the woman who refused to sit beside you that day. I've spent months reflecting, learning, listening. My company required bias training, but what changed me wasn't the training. It was realizing that my fear came from ignorance. You didn't humiliate me. You showed me who I was and gave me the chance to become someone better. I can't undo that moment, but I can live differently because of it. Thank you for giving me that chance." Margaret Holt. Naomi read the letter twice, tears quietly escaping. There was no anger left, only understanding. She set the paper down and whispered, "Then maybe we both landed safely." The next morning, as her return flight prepared for takeoff, Naomi glanced out the window one last time. The sky stretched endlessly, the clouds soft and forgiving. She closed her eyes, resting her hand on her heart, feeling it beat in time with the engines. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been unseen, unheard, underestimated, and still rose. As the plane lifted into the air, the cabin lights dimmed, and Naomi smiled faintly, because this time the sky felt fair. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't flying to prove she belonged. She was flying because she already did.